Welcome back to Contention on ADH TV. I'm your host, James Mathias. On this show, we get behind the debates that are shaping our nation and reveal who is making the big calls and why. And there is no bigger call in Australian politics right now than the one Energy Minister Chris Bowen has made, which is to transform our energy supply from coal and gas to wind and solar. This, as regular viewers of ADH will know, will bankrupt Australia and destroy our social, economic and military security. So you'd think that Bowen would have plenty to worry about already without bothering himself and his department with the opposition's proposed alternative energy strategy. But that is exactly what he's done. And by doing so, he has broken the golden rule of executive government. A couple of weeks ago, Bowen held a press conference to specifically attack the opposition's stated proposal that nuclear energy should at least be considered an alternative to wind and solar. In it, he referred to quote-unquote government costings of the opposition's idea. In other words, he used public servants to assess an opposition policy. This is against every rule in the Book of Good Governance, but I'll get to that in a moment. First, let's look at what the department came up with. Well, there's not a lot of detail. Bowen used our public servants to come up with a costing that never released any details, just the back of the envelope summary, which is, in order to fuel Australia with nuclear, we would need 71 small modular reactors, otherwise known as SMRs, which would cost $387 billion. He said this at a press conference, but the department has not even published that much. You can't even find it in a press release. Bowen simply said it at a press conference and virtually said, "Trust me, I know what I'm talking about." Yeah, right. We all know from media reports that the costing is based on the figures in the CSIRO's GenCost 2022-23 report, which compares the cost of different types of current and future energy production, including SMRs. Some people in the industry think that the GenCost report isn't worth the paper it's written on for two good reasons. Firstly, GenCost's figures assume wind farms can operate for 25 years and solar panels for 30. This is, to put it kindly, wishful thinking. Worst, GenCost assumes nuclear reactors can only operate for 30 years, which is half their expected lifespan. So GenCost's figures are stacked against nuclear from the start. Secondly, GenCost relies on figures from 2018 that are yet to be updated. Nuclear technology is advancing much faster than solar panels and windmills ever could. So it's fair to say that in the past 5 years, it's become significantly cheaper. Added to that, Bowen's dismissal of nuclear is based on the idea that the government, that is, the taxpayer, would provide all of the upfront costs of the SMRs. That's not how it works. Private investors would be more than happy to build SMRs provided that the government could assure them it would not meddle in the industry. Well, that's unlikely as long as Bowen is the minister. Bowen is under serious pressure as the public backlash against his energy policy grows. But let's get back to his conduct as a minister. The impartiality of the public service is sacrosanct to the function of Australian democracy. It may also be at odds with the Ministerial Code of Conduct issued by the Prime Minister upon forming government in May last year. Section 2.6 of the Prime Minister's Ministerial Code of Conduct requires that ministers in the Albanese government ensure that, quote, public servants are deployed only for appropriate public purposes. Moreover, the Australian Public Service Commission's published Values and Code of Conduct in Practice says, quote, advice to government must also be objective and non-partisan. And the Department of Climate Change and Energy's own website states, quote, we're an Australian government agency. Our decisions must be transparent, our policies credible. But here's the thing. When this latest request came from Bowen, the department would have good reason to ask, why are we being tasked with costing a proposal which your government has ruled out repeatedly and which is prevented by a legislated ban on nuclear power generation? a department has been asked to cost a proposal that is by law illegal. Bowen's act of diverting the work of the public servants to write a political hit job breaks his ministerial code of conduct and every other convention about good governance. But Bowen has form here. In 2013, he did the exact same thing as Treasurer under Kevin Rudd and was emphatically rebuked by the heads of Treasury, Finance and the Parliamentary Budget Office. That is 3 departmental heads telling Bowen that the public service is not at his disposal to score political points. Yet here he is again. Does this bloke ever learn? A lot can be drawn out of the timing of Bowen's actions. These figures were leaked to coincide with, surprise, surprise, his appearance on an episode of Q&A on ABC TV. He must have been spooked by the results of a Q&A poll taken months earlier, which found exactly half of Australians support nuclear energy industry. His desperate attempt to control the narrative failed miserably. Q&A held another survey after his appearance, and the number of people supporting nuclear went up. It's now at 59%, and that's from a survey of 11,000 Q&A viewers, so you can imagine how much higher it would be across mainstream Australia. And one last thing. Not only is Bowen using his department, which has 4,000 staff, to write a political hit job, he's also hiring expensive consultants who have so far got things catastrophically wrong. Labor hired consultants Reputex prior to the election to predict their policies would reduce everybody's power prices by $275, a claim repeated more than 90 times by the Prime Minister. We all know how that ended up. We see it every time we open up our energy bills. Now, on the 12th of April this year, Bowen used his department to hire consultancy firm PwC to come up with quote-unquote net zero emissions strategy. This 218-day consultancy will cost the taxpayer a staggering $342,540, or the equivalent of over $1,570 per day. Well, that's nice work if you can get it. We taxpayers can only hope whatever PwC comes up with is more accurate and reliable than the Reputex report. Well, that's all from me. For more news and opinion, check out adh.tv to stay up to date with the best common sense commentary in Australia. I'm James Mathias, and I'll talk to you next week.